Hello, and welcome to the Ride a String podcast. I'm Kevin Sluter.
And I'm Matt Moreno.
And we are bringing you a show about orchestra teachers,
for orchestra teachers,
and those aspiring to be orchestra teachers. Growing and maintaining a program does not always come easy. We often have to find new ways to be vocal about what our program needs, and even more so, how to get specific audiences to listen and understand. Christopher Hanson, a director in the San Marcos area, talks to us about advocating for a program, including communication tactics when working with administration.
So I grew up in Houston, was born in Dallas and raised in Houston, and grew up in a single-parent home, was a latchkey kid, southwest side of Houston, the A-Leaf area, and my mother was really big, I actually found this out after the fact, really big about me having something constructive that would keep me safe to do after school, because she worked 2 or 3 jobs kind of my whole life, as long as I could remember. And I was unaware through some very clever manipulating the summer before my 6th grade year. She had introduced me to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and we would go to the pool at our apartment complex, and she would have it playing on a little boombox that we had, and I was so enticed by what I was hearing, and she said, "Oh, this is a violin," and kind of planted the seed for me to be really curious about violin in particular, because she knew that the program or the school that I was going to had an orchestra. And so kind of unbeknownst to me, she had orchestrated, pun intended, orchestrated this elaborate effort to get me involved in orchestra, because her thought process was, this will keep him inside when I'm at work, and he can be practicing. He can be, doing something constructive and not kind of running around the neighborhood. Little to say, it totally worked. I was completely hooked my 1st grade year. Carlene Beamer, who is still an incredible music educator out in Houston. I get to see her every year at TODA and TMEA. She was a trombone player originally. She was my first orchestra director at Owens Intermediate and A-Leaf ISD. And it sounds so cliche, but the rest is history. I was absolutely hooked. I loved the violin. I loved orchestra. I loved being involved in an arts program. And I had done musical things in elementary school and always been interested in the arts, but this was, what actually got me plugged into it. This gave me a voice to express myself and to learn more about music, so I was hooked. So all the way through intermediate, middle school, and high school, graduated, I had, ironically, you wanting to talk about advocacy and effective communication and community organizing, I had applied to my undergrad as a poli-sci major. And I was very interested in community building and civic engineering and stuff like that dealt with community-driven support systems, was real big in public speaking, organizing community service projects, did stuff with Red Cross and 4-H and all these things when I was in high school. And I applied as a poli-sci major, didn't get in anywhere. I had horrible grades because I was always hanging out in the orchestra room. That's not a byproduct. Kids that hang out in the orchestra room are great, but I just would always wanted to practice and did not care about my classes.
Sure.
Always wanted to be doing something. That's always been my thing, as I love to do. So I was always involved in these extracurricular things and was really devastated that I didn't get into college. I'm a first-generation college student. My mom and dad hadn't graduated from high school, so it was really important for me to get an education. And a long story, trying to make it shorter, I didn't get into college, and then my orchestra director at the time, Jennifer Wagner, who's an awesome orchestra director, still working in Houston, she had a connection with Texas Southern University, which is a historically black college in Houston. And I went and auditioned and was offered a scholarship. So I was like, okay, don't go to college or get money to go to college. It was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to go here for a year, and then maybe I'll transfer somewhere or do something else. But needless to say, just like in 6th grade, I studied music in college for a year and was hooked. I knew that this is what I needed to be doing, and I took every music class that was offered. I graduated with over 180 hours. I wanted to take everything that had to do with music, and graduated with a bachelor's in composition. I was studying some music ed classes and doing a lot with the Texas Music Educators Conference at the time, Collegiate Texas Music Educators Conference, doing a lot of advocacy and joined Phi Mu Alpha and did all these service projects, was working with the Houston Community Music Center and doing after-school programs and A-Leaf. So I was really plugged in, but I recognized in all of my study that being a public school music teacher is really freaking hard. And I had that realization my senior year. And when I started my block in the College of Education and got ready to do like student teaching in that sort of infamous ninth semester, I decided I didn't want to do it. I was like, I really don't want to teach public school. It is way too hard. I have learned enough and been exposed to enough that this is not for me. I don't think that I could do this. And I was really gun shy by the whole thing. Having been involved in a lot of, like I said, sort of extracurricular or after school projects and doing things in schools, knowing a lot of educators, I was overwhelmed by it. So I graduated with the bachelor's in composition and decided to go to grad school and applied to 2 universities for composition and didn't get in. And because I had been such a big advocate for music education, enough faculty had kind of known me from the projects that I had done, and I got offered a position in the music ed department at the Moore School of Music and at Texas State University. Just from the work I had been doing, they said, well, you should come here and study music ed. Okay, great. So again, very similar to my undergrad, I didn't really have any prospects and then suddenly had an opportunity to study music education in grad school. So I went to Texas State University, became a very proud Bobcat, and studied music ed for a year and was also studying composition. And then had a weird, kind of lack of a better word, kind of falling out, because I was drawn to music ed for really studying pedagogy. I was really interested in how people learn music. And the program had really been designed for public school teachers that wanted to do sort of continuing ed. And so it didn't really fit. I had never taught public school. At that point, I had kind of sworn against it because I thought I couldn't do this. It's too hard for me. So the program didn't really fit for me, and I bounced around. I ended up switching to music history, and I graduated after 2 years with the master's in history and master's in composition. Applied for some university jobs doing music history or doing things like that. It didn't really work out. I had an interview and I didn't really know what to do. Wasn't ready to really enter the workforce. So then I applied to come back to Texas State and had actually come back as a violin performance major, and did that for a year and realized that I didn't really want to do performance. So I switched to music theory. And so then I graduated with a master's in music theory. And at that point, I had started the Smart Orchestra, which, as you know, which you were involved with, is a community orchestra with a wide range of members, different backgrounds, adults and young kids and college students. And I had specifically started the Smart Orchestra because the public school system in San Marcos, where Texas State is, did not have public school string program. So a lot of people, Howard Hudeberg and Dr. Ledbetter at Texas State, a lot of people had been working with the school district to try to get something going, and nothing had really stuck. So I had this idea to synergize a lot of the private lesson studios to create this little youth community orchestra, and then petition the school board to restart the string program. So while I was doing the master's in theory, I was running this community orchestra, and when I finished the theory degree, the school board had, at that point, we had petitioned and done presentations and stuff. They had just voted unanimously to restart the orchestra. And that was the spring of 2011. So the fall of 2011, they restarted the public school strings program at the middle schools in San Marcos CISD. And I was finishing the theory degree, but they didn't really heed our advice. They hired a part-time person that was a retired bass player, wasn't certified to teach public school. It was kind of a mess. So because they were part-time and doing contract work, they quit in January. They just gave notice and left. They weren't under a teacher's contract. So that January, I just graduated and had actually just gotten engaged. So I thought, I should probably have a steady income and insurance. And it was a very practical decision.
Sure.
I had, at that point, I could admit now, in hindsight, I'd kind of been hiding in grad school and doing a lot of research and a lot of projects, but I needed to apply it. So I can, again, admit in retrospect, I think I was always supposed to be a public school teacher. I just wasn't ready. And I think very few people are. It is such an overwhelming task to graduate from college and start teaching public school, no matter who you are. It's just such an overwhelming task. So it took me, I always tease people and I say, it took me a few years to become a public school teacher because I really was not ready.
That makes sense.
And started with the program, this new program in San Marcos CISD it was at one middle school at the time, got an emergency certificate and did a non-traditional certification through TEA. And the rest is history. My God, that was 8 years ago. And now we have 2 middle school directors and a growing program and a 5th grade strings program. And I teach full-time now at San Marcos High School, 3 orchestras, and then a music studies program that we started, AP Music Theory and Music Appreciation.
You said restarted the program. I didn't realize it had been a thing prior.
Yes. So the last orchestra director that was employed by the district left in 1957. And what's really weird is strings were huge in San Marcos in the 40s and 50s. In fact, little known fact, the first university string program had been established at Texas State University. It had been started there, and a lot of the faculty that were in the music department at the time were getting some kickback from the community and from admin and were frustrated by it. And some of those faculty had left and gone to the Butler School of Music at UT, where the program took roots and flourished. Yeah. I mean, the Butler School of Music String Project is one of the best in the nation. You know, the National String Project Consortium and everything. I mean, like, it is the poster of what you can do with those college string programs. And it had been started at Texas State. You know, it was a teacher's college, and so it was a good fit, but it didn't stick. So there were orchestras in San Marcos in the public schools for several years. Wow. And in the mid-50s, there was a huge budget cut from the legislature. And one of the first things that got affected were the arts. And, you know, the unfortunate joke about orchestra is it's the last added and first cut. And that happened to a lot of programs. If you kind of look at the history of string programs, there's a big dip in the 50s going into the 60s because of cuts in the legislature.
It still sounds true to today. I mean, I can think of certain areas where they didn't have anyone to fill a position for orchestra.
Yes.
And they just decided to cut orchestra completely.
Mm-hmm.
As of last year, I know of one school that had to go through that, and hopefully they bring it back. But yeah.
It's a shame because, in fact, I was just having this conversation earlier today with another teacher that I think few people realize that orchestra kids are orchestra kids. I think it's unfair to say they're unique. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that they're different in that their peers don't have sort of the same drive and goals and aspirations and are just as successful. It's nothing to do with that. You know, all the cliches like orchestra kids test better or have better grades or all this that we try to sell the program with these products that it creates. Mm-hmm. I personally can't stand that. That's not why we need orchestra in public schools. The kids that are drawn to expressing themselves through a string instrument are different than the kids that want to play clarinet, that want to play oboe, that want to play trumpet. They're different kids.
Yeah.
So when you, and I say this about every art program, we're really fortunate. We just restarted sort of this kickstart to the theater program at the high school. And I was talking to some, fine art faculty at the high school, and they said, well, we're going to lose kids because of it. I thought, no, you're going to put kids that needed theater where they belong. You're not losing kids. Those kids are finding what it is that they needed. So when orchestra programs get cut or when schools don't have orchestra, it frustrates me because I sincerely know that there's a populations of students that are at that campus that aren't getting the art experience that they want and that they need because how they need to express themselves in art is not accessible to them because they don't have orchestra. And I would say the exact same thing of a program or a school that doesn't offer band, doesn't offer choir, doesn't offer visual arts, doesn't offer theater, doesn't offer dance. I would say the exact same thing. It's so important for kids to find their connection to art. And that can mean so many different things. So when schools don't offer comprehensive art programs, they're taking the voice away from kids. That's really what they're doing.
Yeah. I think it's pretty amazing that in 8 years you have 3 full-time directors now in the district.
Yes, yeah.
And obviously it had to have been an uphill battle. So tell us a little bit on how you got the school board to even agree to restart the program, what are some of those steps?
So a big thing, I think this speaks to the broader goal that we have in this conversation, is to talk about advocacy, talking about communication. I think effective communication comes from understanding the difference between wants and needs. And that's actually something my mom taught me when I was younger. I mean, we grew up in a modest household. I'm putting it lightly. We were poor. We had food stamps, and I learned really young. I mean, I distinctly remember Mom telling me there's a difference between want and need. You want these really nice new shoes, this pair of Nikes. Great. You need shoes. That's what you need. So we're going to go to Payless, and these shoes are fine, and they're going to cover your feet. There's a distinction, like you want this really nice meal, you need to eat. So you're going to get food. Let's save the nice meal for later. That stuck with me as a kid. I had a lot of friends in my apartment complex and all that. I mean, we lived that life. We understood the distinction between want and need. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of, I don't want to be presumptuous to the listeners that you have, but in general, from my own experience, a lot of teachers and a lot of fine arts advocates in general go wrong because I don't think they make the distinction between want and need. As a fine arts teacher, we want everything for our kids. We want everything for ourselves. We want to have all of these resources and all of these opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. And I put otherwise in air quotes, otherwise being whatever obstacle you think is in your way. If this wasn't in my way, we could be doing all of these other things. So we have all these wants, which are fantastic because those wants fuel the goals that you create for yourself and your program and your students. It fuels the standards that you're going to create for yourself and your program and your students. Wants are absolutely necessary as you're building a program, but they are so distinctly different than your needs. So when we engaged the school board at the time, this was back in 2009 is when we started the Smart Orchestra and started talking to the school board and superintendent. Something I had to immediately assess are what are the needs? What are the needs? Well, a huge part of public education in any state, but particularly in Texas, is accountability. What accountability means, if you boil it down, is that there are standards that are in place and you must meet those standards through assessment. And again, this is a really broad brush because you could apply that to anything that talks about assessment and standards and accountability. Those are big buzzwords in education. So I had to look at what does the school district need? Well, it needs accountability. Well, how does it have to be accountable? And a lot of it was me doing research. I had to go in, I had to look at the Texas Education Code. I had to figure out, okay, what chapters deal with fine arts? What are the requirements for these schools? What is it that this school needs to be accountable to TEA, to be accountable to the bodies that assess them? Mm-hmm. And what I found was that even at the time in 2009, with House Bill 5 and a lot of great landmark legislative decisions that added to fine arts programs in the state of Texas, school districts were being encouraged to offer comprehensive arts programs. Right now, in the Texas Education Code, schools with specific populations are required to offer specific number of arts programs. In other words, between band, choir, orchestra, and dance, you're required to have 3 of the 4. You have to offer them to have a comprehensive arts education.
Okay.
And so there were a lot of districts that were out of compliance, that were not offering what they needed to offer their students if they had a certain population. And there are all kinds of ways that you can curtail that part of the law, and you can have people that double dip, have a choir director that also does a dance or drill team. And so people have gotten away from having full-time faculty that do that, or they hire band directors that also teach English or things like that. So, those are unique situations with small 2A schools, 3A schools. But the point was, there was a mandate that said that this needed to be in place. When I had that information, the conversations that I had with the superintendent and the school board were very different. Mm-hmm. Because I was not this impassioned music teacher that believed in the transformative power of the arts for children and something that they could shrug their shoulders and roll their eyes at and say, okay, here's another zealot who has had this transformative experience in the arts, and he's just trying to sell us to spend more money on a program that we don't need because we have band and we have choir and we have dance. Why do we need to have orchestra? This is someone that's passionate about it, and I'm glad it worked for them. It's not for San Marcos. I mean, these were the conversations we were having. then I'm able to go to the table and say, okay, I believe that San Marcos wants to be the best school district possible. Would you say that's a true statement? And with school board members and the superintendent, of course they agree. We want to be the best school district possible. Do you want to offer a comprehensive education for your children? Of course we want to have a comprehensive education. Do you believe in matching the standards and expectations of what the Texas Education Agency and the Texas Education Code set forth for public schools? Well, of course we do. Okay, then why don't you have orchestra? Because you need to have orchestra in order to satisfy these requirements, in order to meet these expectations. That conversation was so drastically different because, again, it wasn't about what I wanted. What I wanted is for San Marcos to have a public school strings program. It then became about what was needed. What was needed for, and insert all the things that I've talked about, for there to be a comprehensive arts education, for them to expand the arts curriculum in a way that it would be enriching to the community and to the student body, for them to be able to hire more art faculty, for them to meet the standardized requirements as set forth by the law through the Texas Education Code, for them to meet those requirements and be accountable to the state in terms of their fine arts education. This is what's needed. You need to have an orchestra. When the district recognized that they, quote unquote, needed an orchestra, that was what changed everything. And I'm not going to say that it was a conversation that made that happen, by far. No. I mean, there was a ton of advocacy that went behind it. The Smart Orchestra had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It synergized a lot of the string activity that was going on through people that were taking private lessons, through Texas State University students that were in the orchestra, through community members. We were performing and creating, and I don't want this to sound subversive, but creating a need in the community. And that's what it helped to do, is people didn't know what they didn't know. Mm-hmm. There wasn't an orchestra in the community, so how would they know they need orchestra? When the community orchestra had started and people were coming to the concerts and seeing it and people were talking about it, there was this curiosity that set into the community where parents would go, wow, my kid loves the Smart Orchestra. Why don't we have orchestra in the school? And that's where we were able to capitalize on it. Yeah. Because then parents and students and faculty members are saying, yeah, why don't we have an orchestra? So that translated to conversations with school board members and superintendents saying, your community needs this. There's a want, and it facilitates this need. And so we would piggyback off of that, and we presented a ton of white papers that we got from NAFME. Oh my goodness. I mean, MENC has the most incredible resources for music education advocacy you can imagine. I mean, the website's not that great, if we're being honest. Their website's really convoluted, but when you learn to navigate it and you can call, they have a whole resources page, and I was printing white papers for string ed stuff and just delivering it and emailing it to school board members and the superintendent. And again, for me, the wants became a need. We needed to have orchestra. And I'll never forget, at the school board meeting where they voted on it, and they voted unanimously, the school board president at the time, David Chu, huge advocate for arts education in San Marcos, former mayor, and had done all kinds of things in the community, he had planned on doing a filibuster until the school board agreed to have the orchestra back. Wow. And he told me after the meeting, I hadn't known, and he said, I had planned on doing a filibuster until everyone agreed to do it. But there was so much support at that point from all the people we had been working with and talking to and expressing this need to create orchestra. It was voted unanimously to reinstate the orchestra. And there were over, I'll never forget it, someone told me, I did not personally count, but there were over 100 people from the community that had shown up to the school board meeting. I mean, to put that in context, there's usually like 15. Right. I mean, like, it's a small community. And, I mean, it was packed. It was standing room only. And I'll never forget being there. And they voted on the matter. And David Chu looked at everybody and he laughed. And he said, I had planned to filibuster, but I'm so glad that the board sees this vision. And everybody agreed and made some positive comments. And he struck the gavel and he said, okay. And like half the room cleared out because people had just come to hear what's going to happen with the orchestra.
That's incredible.
So it was magical. Yeah, it was like some movie scene or something. It was really cool.
And if I remember correctly, when you started the program, weren't we rehearsing here at the high school?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. How did that work out?
Again, I go back, it was wants and needs, because the Smart Orchestra needed a place to rehearse. The place we were rehearsing originally at Texas State University was being closed. There was a little performing arts center on the outskirts. I can't remember the name of it. It had the organ in it.
Oh, it was like the old PAC.
Yeah, Stewart Hall or something. So some old PAC that was there was demolished. Yeah. They tore it down. So we didn't have anywhere to rehearse. And at the time, there was a band and a choir. Those were the only music programs at the high school. And there was a band and orchestra and choir hall. So there was literally a rehearsal space that wasn't being used. And I confronted the principal at the time. Confronted's an aggressive word. I really wasn't. It was just a conversation. I said, hey, the Smart Orchestra needs a place to practice. Again, it was about needs. It was very straightforward. Like, we need a place to practice. You have a rehearsal hall that is literally not being used on these days. It was Thursday afternoons at the time. I said, would we be able to use it? Is this great community collaboration? We're a nonprofit organization, so we wouldn't have to do fees or anything. And the principal agreed to it, understood the vision, was really excited about it. Superintendent agreed to it. So we came in and were rehearsing at the high school, which some people that were not thrilled about having an orchestra, were definitely confronted by that. But it was, and people always tease me. They're like, well, was that intentional? Of course it was intentional. I mean, there was an orchestra meeting at the high school. People were seeing orchestra at the high school. I wanted that to be a reality for the kids and for the other faculty at the school. So that was very intentional. Again, it wasn't that it was subversive, that it was this like evil plan I had to overthrow the world. It was very intentional to show them that there's a need for this and we have people that support it. And yeah, we stayed here at the high school. In fact, the Smart Orchestra, which is celebrating its 10th season, if you can believe that, just left. We left the high school last year. And it had to do with, again, needs. There was a need for space and resources that it wasn't working here. We had kind of outgrown the space, and the orchestra program here had grown so much that we flipped over, and we rehearse at a community center at a church now, and have partnerships there. So, yeah, we were rehearsing at the high school.
Wow. Okay, so you get your foot in the door with the district, programs created in San Marcos.
Yes.
All right, so what did the next few years look like in terms of building it into the high school, and then justifying that you needed to have a second director at the middle school as you progressed into the high school with those students?
Absolutely. It's an arduous journey, and it was very political and very strategic. So when I started, I created a 5-year plan, and I shared it with everyone. I mean, I sent it to the superintendent, to the school board, to my principal. I gave it to everybody. And I was very deliberate about, here's how I'm going to recruit, here's what I need in terms of a budget, here's where I'm going to be at the end of year 2. I was very deliberate about it. And it was lofty. I mean, it was this huge, I had set huge goals to accomplish in my first 5 years. So I had everybody look at it, and I got some feedback from it, and I kept it. And at the end of each year, I would engage my principal and the superintendent in those conversations and say, here's where I am in my 5-year plan, here's what we did this year. And it was constant communication. I mean, I was CCing my principal on all these emails that I was getting, and anytime we did something, I would call the paper, and I would make sure what we did got in the newspaper. I spent an insane amount of time just working on communication, sending out emails, doing news press releases and all that kind of stuff, staging things, getting photos in places, doing a ton of community performances. I mean, we would play at City Hall. We would do these like wine and wassail walk events where we would play downtown for like Christmas, and I mean, just anything you think of. We just played constantly and just made sure that people understood orchestra's here, it's a thing. And it was lots and lots of communication. From the communication, I would always share our success and sort of get buy-in from the principals and from the superintendent, because we would get all this press for successful ventures, a contest or whatever it was, a performance, and I would make sure that they knew, okay, if you liked this, if you liked the success that came from this trip or this contest or this performance, it's going to require more. I was able to do it this year with this, with these resources. If you want to see that again, I need more. Mm-hmm. And so it was about, again, needs and wants. I wanted a lot of stuff, and I couldn't get it every year because they would say, well, we can't do that right now because we don't have the budget. We can't this because we don't have that. And I was like, all right, well, if you want this to happen, I need to have these stands. I need these instruments. If we're going to, like, we're offering beginning orchestra this year, if you want students to have an instrument regardless of their financial standing, then I need 7 more violins this year. And the stuff that I needed, I always got. And that was huge. And that's something that I praise San Marcos CISD over. When I needed something, I always got it. I didn't always get what I wanted. That was different because I would set huge goals. But when I needed something, and it was always justified, I would say, here are the kids that don't have instruments, and they would get those instruments. I need music stands. I need rosin. I need strings. I need books. I need music. It was huge, because we just started the programs. I had nothing. There wasn't a music library. There were no supplies. There was nothing. So it was very big. It was a lot of advocacy, of getting exposure for the kids and communicating the success that we had, and then translating that into, okay, if you like this, if you like what you're seeing, then it comes at a cost. I'm going to have support. And it's exactly what we did when we hired the middle school director. We were growing the program and doing things, and when we'd experience growth, they'd be really excited. I'm so glad the program's growing. This happened. I was like, great. If you want it to continue to grow, I need another director. I can't do this on my own. If you want, and at that time we had added the music theory class, and we had added music appreciation to the high school curriculum. And I told them, they were like, this is great. We love it. And it's fantastic. I said, okay, if you want me to keep doing that, then you need to hire another director. And I don't want to deceive any of your listeners that it was at any point easy, or that everything was always cooperative from my end and from the administrator's end. I was a thorn on a lot of administrators' sides because the squeaky wheel really does get the grease. That's how it works. I wanted to ask,
with the administrators, tell us what that was like. Talking to a school board, which is something I can't even imagine doing myself.
Yeah.
Did you work your way through the chain of command? Send it to your principal, your 5-year plan or any information, and ask that they would forward it above them?
I think that's unique. In other districts, the path that we carved out for ourselves to have orchestra in San Marcos would not work anywhere else. And I think that's important for people to know. I have strategies for success, if you will, like things that I adhere to that help my program and my career and my students. But a lot of what it is that we accomplished and that we are doing is for San Marcos. It works here, and it works in its time. When the program started, there was a lot of transition in the admin. The district was smaller. It's grown in the past 8 years that I've been here in terms of the number of kids, and the campuses. So it was complicated. I would send it to everybody. I had very good relationships with several school board members because we either went to church together, we'd see each other at HEB, or I had relationships with these people because they were my friends. It was small enough. That would not happen right now. The district has grown. We have a new superintendent. We have new central office staff. We have a new principal. And I was specifically told, and rightfully so, you don't send things directly to the school board. That doesn't happen anymore.
Of course.
It needs to come through us. It was something I was not used to because previously the admin had worked differently. So everybody has to learn what their administrative structures are and what the admin are comfortable with. And now I send just as many emails, and I still share my 5-year plans and everything. I just send them to different people. Mm-hmm. And I make sure that they get it. And if I don't get the response that I need, I work my way up the chain of command. And our superintendent obviously knows me, and I do interact with him when appropriate. But I had to learn. That's why I said I created my own problems sometimes because I was very tenacious with what I wanted, and that created a bad taste in some people's mouths. I have definitely made a lot of mistakes because I was adamant that I would get these things that I wanted and I didn't necessarily need. Mm-hmm. And so it creates false impressions, which is dangerous. I'd say, well, I really need this when I didn't. It's just something I wanted. and I would get, a boost in my budget or some more instruments or something, and then not have the kids to play the instruments or not program that piece, and it would kick me in the butt. It'd be like, okay, why did we scramble to get you this money? Why did we scramble to get these resources for you, and you didn't end up using them? Like, oh crap. I could only get the things that I needed, which was appropriate. It was just tons of communication, and it was learning the administration, because some of them I could pat them on the back, give them a hug. We were good friends. We could go to dinner together. Our kids went to the same daycare. Like, they were very personable, and it made sense. Others didn't live in San Marcos. We didn't know each other. It was totally different, and they expected professional communication, which is not bad. It's just different. Sure. So it was a lot of me learning that, and we had this will put it into perspective. So in the 8 years that I've worked in San Marcos, I have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 principals between 3 campuses. I have had 3 superintendents. I have had 5 assistant superintendents over curriculum instruction. I've had 3 superintendents of HR, 4 assistant superintendents of finance. And I could keep going. I've just 20 different APs between the 3 campuses. So that was huge. I had to build relationships with all of those people to communicate effectively, and it was always different. There was never one thing that I did that worked. When there was a new person that I had to engage with, some of them were all about numbers, and they were very pragmatic, and they were positivistic in their thinking, and they only understood graphs and charts and all that. And I was like, great. So when I wanted to meet with them, I printed out my numbers, and I had charts. And I tell you what, man, people laugh about taking those basic computer classes in high school and college where you have to learn, Excel and all that. I'd be damned if I did not use it, and still use it all the time. I make pie graphs and charts and Excel sheets, and because some of my admin, that's how they understand things. So I translate for them.
You just have to take time to get to know them and understand.
Yeah. And you immediately, you have a sit down meeting with someone, and you'll start talking to them, and you'll explain this, incredible experience you had with the kids at a concert, and how you picked this piece and you programmed it, and the audience was moved to tears, and you're talking about how euphoric a moment that was, and they give you that blank stare because they're like, I don't have emotions, I don't understand that. Beep boop bop, I'm a robot. I'm talking the extreme. There are some leaders and administrators that are just very by the book and really big about accountability and want to hear the numbers, and that's what satisfies them. Again, that's not bad, but that's how some people are. So in my conversation with certain admin, I'd read that. You can read the room pretty quick. And I would test the waters and say, when we had 400 people in attendance at that concert, and I had 75 kids on stage, and I would see their eyes light up. Immediately I would see, this is numbers for you. No problem. And sure enough, you find out they were a math teacher, or they were, so I think you have to get to know who it is that you're working with, and you should not expect everybody to appreciate orchestra the way that you do.
Right.
An admin told me this to me once. It was huge for me as a public school teacher. I was really frustrated because I wasn't getting something that I wanted. I said, I just don't understand how you can't appreciate whatever it is, and why you don't understand this, and why don't you understand that? And I was griping at them, which I don't recommend. I gripe at my admin, not necessarily a good idea, but literally griping at them. Why don't you understand this? And they snapped back at me. I'll never forget this. It was so wise. They said, it's not my job to understand orchestra. That's your job. That's why I hired you. You're the orchestra director. You have to understand those things. And man, I tell you what, it knocked me on my butt, because I thought, holy crap, you're right. Why would I come into a meeting with an administrator and tell them how amazing it is to be an orchestra director and talk to them like they're an orchestra director? They're not an orchestra director. I could do that at a contest. I could do that with my colleagues. We could talk about at a region meeting how great it is to be an orchestra director, what we're frustrated with as an orchestra director, because you're orchestra directors. But you cannot expect to effectively communicate with someone if they're not an orchestra. And you see what I'm saying? You have to change your language. Don't talk to parents that way. Yeah. Don't talk to parents about the struggles you're having as an orchestra director. They're not going to get it. They're not going to appreciate it. They're probably going to just hear you complaining. They're going to think that you don't like your job. It's so quick to be misunderstood. So in talking to the admin, I could read it real quick and say, okay, I need to bring numbers. I need to talk about that. And sure enough, the same people that fed off of numbers, or I should say the people that fed off of numbers and the people that fed off this intrinsic, artistic, spiritual experience that these kids were having, this transformative experience, both of them learned to appreciate my program because I would communicate with them differently.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so it just sounds like you said yourself you've made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Yes.
And would you say you've learned more from that than when you were doing everything on the right path?
I can be totally honest with myself. I don't think I've ever been on the right path. Oh my gosh, I'm just being honest, because a lot of what I did when I first started, and I feel like I keep going back to this, but I guess is the theme of this conversation, is that wants and needs. So much of what I was doing when I started teaching public school was about what I wanted. And I mean, it was admirable. It was what I wanted for my kids. It was what I wanted for the community. It's what I wanted for the school, like looking at this big vision and picture that I had. It was all about what I wanted.
I mean, it really, but yeah, your thought is all a really
and
strong
it was good.
Philosophy.
Exactly. I mean, it was good. That's why I said wants are so important, because it helped me create these goals and it helped me accomplish so much. But where that can go wrong, where I think I went wrong, is that I was fueled by these desires, these intense desires. And so I would very quickly lose perspective in the chain of command, in the resources that I had that were accessible to me and what wasn't accessible to me. I mean, practical things, needing space, needing a classroom, wanting the Performing Arts Center at certain times. You can very quickly become unyielding in your desires, and that, well, the orchestra needs to rehearse because the orchestra is important. And I would lose sight sometimes of the collective, that, and this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. In the scope of public school education, we are a line item, and that line item says fine arts. I think a lot of people fail to appreciate that, and we resent administrators for it. And I don't think that, and now I say this, you'd asked me this 8 years ago, I never would have said this. I would have, fine arts are the most important thing in school, and I would have been waving that banner. I still think that the fine arts are vital to every individual's education. They're absolutely vital. And I don't want to get on too much of a tangent, but I want to take this caveat to say, the STEM movement that has come out and this huge push on mathematics and engineering and technology and science, and it's so important, but it is being fueled by this larger conversation, these fallacies that are getting perpetuated through media and through politics, that there's this dirge of technicians and engineers and blue-collar workers, and we need that. That's not true. It doesn't exist. What they're realizing is that this quote-unquote international technology war race that we're in, where they were pumping all these statistics when the STEM movement came out with NSF, they were fueling all these statistics of how we were behind China and innovation and all these things, and it wasn't founded. It wasn't totally true. What they wanted was to create more engineers, create more scientists, push technology so that we would be more competitive in a global market. What ended up happening was STEM was pushing itself so hard, and this is sort of the story that goes with it. There was an architectural firm that was getting graduates fresh out of school, and they had failed in their coming into the firm to create new projects. They had lost the ability to be creative. They could recreate anything. They were up to date on the newest software, the newest programs, the newest ideas, but they were not generating the ideas. They were perpetuating what was given to them. So it created all of these engineers and technicians and scientists. I mean, this is back in the early 2000s that this is happening. You were creating all these people, but they didn't know how to be creative. They didn't know how to think divergently. And they went back and said, well, what was missing? Well, they're coming from all of these STEM magnets that got rid of art programs. And we were teaching kids how to solve equations, and we were telling them what the equation was, but we never let them try to solve it without the guidance. We never let them say, okay, what if there isn't a solution? Algebra introduces the number I, and what happens when you don't have answers? How can we be imaginative? How can we create these answers, and what are the solutions? I remember that being a big moment for me when I took algebra. I hated algebra, but I remember saying, there's not a solution, but we're going to create a solution with this imaginary number to see what the possibilities are. That's art. That's what that is. And we lose sight of the bigger picture of, okay, here's this compensatory education. Here's this education that's required by law for everybody to the age of 18. What is it going to do? Well, it's going to trickle down from national and local politics of what's quote unquote needed. And what's going to fuel what's needed is what's being consumed socially. We're in a capitalist democracy. Well, technology is being consumed. Everybody has the iPhone and the iPad and all this. So we created this need for scientists and technology and engineering and education. It was created by the National Science Foundation. And it received millions and millions of dollars of funding from the legislature because the president of NSF was in the back pocket of all these legislators. So, and this is not, I probably sound like some conspiracy theorist. It really isn't. I mean, this has been written about. I had the great fortune of doing a project when I started a PhD program in the College of Education at Texas State. And I did a project in one of my education classes on the STEM to STEAM initiative, which is adding the arts. And so this is where I got all this information. I was blissfully unaware of all this happening. And I'm toting the line going, yeah, we need STEM. And then I go, holy crap, we don't need STEM. We wanted STEM, right? There was this perceived idea that we were falling behind in this global technology race. And so they tried to cut it off at the corner and say, okay, well, let's create all these STEM initiatives and that'll get us what we want. And then they realized they needed the arts. So San Marcos, as a point, we got into they had the STEM fair that they've had for years. And the poster that's behind you, we turned it into a STEAM fair. We started the arts and got all these arts things that were going on and turned it into a STEAM fair. And so I'm saying all of that to backtrack now. Forgive me for the tangent. I'm saying all of that because we forget that education is huge. It's a national thing that as a collective, as a society, we have decided that we want by law to require young people to be educated. So what do we put in that education? And that has been the big point of contention. Well, do they need to know math? Okay, we're going to teach them math. Well, what math are we going to teach them? And they need to know history. Okay, they need to know history. Well, what history are we going to teach them? And luckily, our founding fathers and their brilliance and in their conversations, is the famous, what is it, the Jefferson quote, right? I study politics and engineering and economics so that my children can study science and history and the humanities, and their children can study the arts. I'm sure you've heard that quote.
Yeah.
I may not be attributing it correctly, but that's the idea. Is there was this foundation that was laid, and we create this structure for public education. Where are the arts? And the arts get inserted, but they get inserted in specific ways. This goes back to where we were learning the law and learning what are the needs and the wants. I want a lot of art education, but what's required? So you've got to know the law. You've got to know the expectations. You have to know that. And in terms of what's required by law, in terms of budgeting and school finance, in terms of hiring and how staff are coded, we are all fine arts. That's how we get lumped together. We are a line item. I used to see that as pejorative. I used to see that as something that was damning. That, well, I'm not unique. Orchestra is no different than everybody else, and we all get lumped together, and that's frustrating. This is particularly for middle schools. A lot of people don't realize that. Every district is different, but middle school principals have much more agency in terms of how they run their campus, much like elementary school principals, than do, let's say, high school principals.
Right.
Middle school principals usually control, and it's different in every district, but usually control their budget completely. And they have a line item for fine arts, and they divvy that money up, and a lot of people lose sight of that. So when we quibble with our colleagues, and our colleagues are the visual art teachers and the dance teacher, it's not just band and choir. When we quibble with our colleagues, we're hurting each other. We're hurting orchestra because it's a line item. And the more that we can collaborate and promote the arts as important, I think the more support that we get. And it's where I have gone wrong a lot, is that I have pushed the orchestra, and then other people suffer because there's not as much exposure, or there's not as much communication for them. And at the end of the day, that balance sheet says fine arts.
Yeah.
So I might get more money, but who do they take it away from?
Right.
You know, where did that happen? Because if it hits somebody else, it's affecting other kids. It's affecting the arts in general. I have never wanted to see a school that has, 500 people in their orchestra and 10 people in band. I think that's asinine. I don't understand why we fight with each other and say, well, this program needs to be bigger, or there's more success there because of the numbers there. No, what's happening in the arts? If you have, I think for me, a successful school is you have over 70% of your student population plugged into the arts. That's success. And I'm not even aiming that high. I'm talking 70% of your kids are engaged in the arts, not taking Art 1, not an introductory choir, not in Dance 1. They are engaged. They are in the second course. They're in the second tier of curriculum for an arts program. If you have over 70% of your student population engaged in the arts, that is success. And it is very depressing, if I'm being candid. It's depressing to say that the vast majority of schools in the state of Texas, let alone our country, cannot say that. They might have a large percentage, about 45% of a student population on a campus in an art program, but engaged in an art program, which I'm defining as in the second year of that curriculum.
You've passed the introductory level.
You've passed the introductory level, and you know that you want to be involved in that program. It's very few people. And I think we can all kind of hang our head low and appreciate that when we look at 6th grade retention, 8th grade retention. It's so frustrating when I think about what my middle school numbers are, and if you stop and think, okay, one of my middle schools has got over 50 kids registered for their beginning orchestra. That's great. So in 3 years, I should see 50 kids walk in my door as freshmen. That's not happening.
Yeah.
Why is that not happening? And that's a different conversation, it's a complicated answer. But these are things that I learned because this is how I needed to communicate with administrators. This is how I needed to communicate with parents. The only reason I'm saying any of this stuff about STEM or STEAM or numbers or retention or any of that, I learned from engaging in very critical dialogue with administrators and community members and parents. And really what it did is it made me a better educator. It made me a better advocate for myself because I was no longer communicating in one way. I no longer had a single voice as an orchestra director in public school. I had the voice of an administrator, of a parent, of a community member, because I understood what they wanted to hear and what they needed to hear. And so everything that I said at that point, everything that I was doing, the emails I was writing, everything came out differently. And it evolved because I was so engaged with being an effective communicator.
And backtracking, that also includes with your whole department for fine arts.
Oh, absolutely.
Because like you just said, you don't want to throw anyone under the bus. You don't want any other program to suffer. Exactly. So I guess I imagine when you're talking to administration about some needs for the program, you're also pushing for something that, say, band needed, or theater, just to really instill that they should not have anything taken away from them.
Oh, exactly. And this isn't a lot to ask of, colleagues, people that are listening. We need to know each other. And when I say know each other, I know this is so overwhelming because it's huge, and people are going to say, well, that's what my fine arts coordinator does. That's what our AP over fine arts is responsible for. I think you should know what the dance team needs. I think you should know how many kids made it to region and choir. You don't need to know the specifics, but I cannot tell you how many times I've been in casual conversations with an administrator, and they'll tell me, hey, congratulations, I heard, one of your kids was the principal bass player in the region orchestra. Yeah, did you hear that choir got 5 kids in and we have a tenor section leader there too? I always do that, always. And I'm not trying to be pious or like some fine arts hero. That's just survival. Because it's not just me. I mean, it just isn't. And I think if we build an island for ourselves or try to build some ivory towers, you are setting yourself up for failure because those walls are going to fall. And you need your colleagues. At the end of the day, that balance sheet says fine arts. That is how it is set up on a national level for the curriculum and at the state level. That is how the curriculum is set up. That's how the financing is set up. And I don't think it's a bad thing because there is strength in numbers. And when you look at the diversity of what we can offer with our curriculum and compared to our counterparts, I mean, prime example, and we just wax on this, like take mathematics. I'm going to try to exhaust everything that I can, and I'm looking at secondary education. We can have algebra. You can do algebra 1, algebra 2. Mm-hmm. There are EOC tests for that. There's pre-cal. There's calculus. Was it AB?
AB and BC.
And then BC. So there's 2 calculus courses.
Statistics.
We can do statistics. Some campuses are able to offer statistics as an AP exam for that. Trigonometry, maybe if you're at a magnet school. I think I've heard of trigonometry at the high school level. If you're a magnet school, maybe you get trigonometry. Geometry, of course. Mm-hmm. Geometry. I'm to 8. Okay. Let's go to fine arts. Visual arts. Oh my God. Sculpting, multimedia, there's computer graphics, there's painting, there's photography. This is stuff we offer here at San Marcos High School. That's all I'm thinking about right now. Yeah. There's multiple levels of R1. There's the art history course that they offer. So I'm going to just take a break because I'm already at 6. So let's go to music. All right. I'm not even going to count the fact that there are multiple ensembles. Let's be fair and just say that band is band, which is a joke, right?
Right.
Your sub, non-varsity, varsity, all that. Like these are all different ensembles with totally different standards. But let's just call it orchestra ensemble, band ensemble. So we've got band, we've got choir, we've got orchestra. But there will most likely be a jazz band, which is not band. That's a different thing. Mm-hmm. Here we happen to have a salsa band. We also have a mariachi. Mm-hmm. There's a vocal jazz component that meets. It's an after-school program, but it's something that they offer. So there's an alternative vocal ensemble that's being offered. And we had, I'm going to use this because Anna Macias was with us today, so there's the awesome fiddle, like Lake Travis Fiddlers, so there's an alternative string ensemble. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to count that. And again, it might be extracurricular, but it's an art offering. Uh-huh. So where music, let's jump over to dance. So there's drill team, there's usually some drill team, and then there's usually some component of alternative dance. Usually in perspective of like where I was in A-Leaf, there was A-Leaf Jazz Ballet. So they do something to show you the alternative to what happens in football season after drill team. Mm-hmm. And there's multiple levels of dance, but I'm just clumping it all into dance.
Right.
Let's just call it dance.
But the point is each of our mediums have so many distinct
Oh yeah. And again,
courses.
To be fair, I'm not talking courses. I'm just talking about avenues in which you can explore that curriculum. Mm-hmm. AP music theory, music appreciation courses, music history courses, which usually offered at
theater tech.
I haven't even opened theater. Yeah. So theater, which there's going to be acting, but there's also going to be theater tech. There's going to be stage direction. There's playwright and screenwrite. There's a history of theater that's offered. I'm over 20. I literally stopped counting.
Right.
I'm way over 20.
Yeah.
And it's not inclusive in any way. There's so many other things that I'm not talking about and special programs that are offered. I mean, in anything else, like science, you've got biology, maybe astronomy if they offer it, physics, you could count, earth science they might have, especially at the middle schools.
Yeah. And
then chemistry.
Right. And anatomy.
If they offer anatomy, because that's a specialist program, but they could have that. Mm-hmm. Usually with the health career science, if they have that endorsement. 6.
I'm sure there's a couple more, but yeah. 6.
U.S. history, world history. The humanities are always smaller, which is devastating. And then there's the, proverbial English. That's all you get. If you're lucky, maybe you have like a world lit class in your senior year or something. But there's the English 1, 2, 3, 4. So anyway, I'm belittling the point, but you see what I'm saying. I mean, the scope of what we offer in terms of curriculum and experience is massive compared to our colleagues. Mm-hmm. I always joke, I say my colleagues across the hallway. Like in the other areas, Texas does this designation, and I wish more states did, and not enough people say it. There are the foundations courses, the foundation of your education in public school, and then there are the enrichment courses, and we fall under enrichment. House Bill 5, it changed that. So there's no longer electives. That's a taboo term. We don't refer to them as electives, and they changed it in the Texas Education Code. So electives gives you the idea that it's optional, and the reason the legislature changed it is because the arts are not optional. And now, thanks to every Student Succeeds Act, it is a part of the national curriculum. So the arts are a required part of the curriculum. So when you call the arts extracurricular, it's defamatory. You are putting it down because they are, from the national and state level, they are a required part of an education for someone going through a K through 12 program in the state of Texas and in the country. So they're not extracurricular, they're enrichment courses, and the idea is that they enrich the experience that you have in foundations. So for foundations, I mean, everyone is required to go through those courses. That's why they have as many teachers as they do in their department. Everyone is required to take that English class that comes in as a freshman. We don't have that luxury. It is elected in terms of what you're going to engage in, and that's why there's so many options.
And if you're going to continue, yeah.
But I think if we all took a step back and appreciated how big our fine arts departments are, I think people would start to feel a little more empowered because, you're the only orchestra director. Yeah, but you're one of, 12, 15, 20 art teachers on your campus. How many other departments are that big?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's so empowering.
So back to helping people understand what we do and what we need. Looking at the parents who maybe tell their kid, oh, you're only going to do orchestra for 1 year, you're only going to do band for 1 year, and then you're getting out. It's not, coming up with propaganda to say, oh, this is why your kid should join, but what is it that you find that parents want to hear or need to hear in order for them to understand the benefits of keeping their kid in a fine arts program? And again, what is it that we want to expose about what their kid is doing so that the parents can understand it? Because I find, I think a lot of people do, that you run into some parents who they find out, oh, my kid's not in the top group and there's 6 orchestras here or whatever. And they're like, well, you shouldn't be in it. You're not any good. Mm. And there's just so much more than that, obviously.
Yeah.
We have different levels for the kids to succeed and enjoy and stimulate their minds in a different way. What do you feel that the parents need help understanding because they are not orchestra directors?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to answer that question in that a lot of that I think deals directly with how you build your program as a director. I think it's going to be hard for some people to hear, and forgive me for whomever listens to this because I don't mean to offend anyone. I think every public school teacher works harder than anyone could ever imagine and works harder than anyone could ever articulate. No one understands how difficult it is to be a public school teacher except public school teachers. No one understands how difficult it is to be a public school orchestra director except public school orchestra directors. So when you are confronted with a parent that says, I don't want my kid to be in this program anymore because we're not getting what we want out of it, that has to deal more with that parent than it does necessarily you and what you're doing with your program. At the same time, it is important to be critical of that conversation and ask yourself, what is it that parent wanted for their student that my program is not offering? If, in the example that you gave, what they were looking for was success and was a title, they needed a merit badge that said, I'm the best player. If that's what they were looking for and your program is founded on ability-based grouping and meeting kids where they are and challenging them to a new level they haven't been, you stick by your standards. Do not sacrifice your ethics as a teacher to say, well, I just want to have that kid because they're a strong player, so I'm going to go ahead and give them this chair. No, if your program is founded on the principle of ability-based groupings, if you really know that your auditions are fair and that you are meeting kids where they need to be, and that's where that kid is supposed to be to experience real growth on their instrument and in the discipline, say goodbye to that student and that parent. It will be hard, and I would engage with the student and talk to the student and say, what is it that you want? And if the student is feeling the same way, I've had multiple kids that after auditions are posted, they leave, and I let them leave in peace. and I high-five them in the hallway and I hug them and I still talk to their parents at the grocery store, like, I'm not bitter that they left. Of course I'm sad to see them go.
And this is after discussing it with them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I don't want them to leave. I always want my kids to be in the program because it helps my numbers. It's a part of the big picture. But if they don't want to be here, I don't want them to be here. Mm-hmm. This is an old adage. You cannot teach someone that doesn't want to be taught. You cannot create an orc out of someone that doesn't care about the orchestra. You're wasting your time and your energy and your resources. So if there's someone that doesn't want to be in the program and it's because they're looking for something that you are not going to offer or that you should not offer because it's going to show bias or be unfair, I say do not do it. It will affect your program, obviously, but the principle that you're standing behind is going to draw other people that you would not have had otherwise. And I've experienced that parents appreciate my candor and they appreciate how I build my program. And I have had kids leave because of audition results. And I have a small program. I'm desperate to keep a lot of those kids. I had a kid just the past year that quit my varsity group, had been in it for 2 years. And his junior year, didn't make the varsity group, quit the program. I've been in varsity for 2 years. Well, the standard for the varsity orchestra was different for the past 2 years. Everything has become more challenging and you did not audition well. You just expected to be in the varsity group. So it's difficult, but it's really important. Now, the reason I gave that sort of ominous preface that I might offend people is because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people fall into the trap of creating a program that they think perpetuates some ideal of success, and that success is equated to, sweepstakes trophies and the number of kids that make the region orchestra and the number of ones at solo and ensemble. And if your program is built off of winning, then what you're going to attract is people that want to win. Mm-hmm. The intrinsic benefits, the transformative effect of an arts program on students and their learning takes second place. So the people that are coming want to win. If you really want insight on that perspective of recruitment and retention based off of this culture of winning, I have had devastating conversations in terms of the enlightenment that I gained from it with football coaches. I mean, you talk about politics and community and parent involvement and aggression. I mean, parents that will transfer their kids out of the school district because a team doesn't win and we've been fortunate. I mean, this is a shout out to Mark Soto. We have an incredible athletic director in San Marcos. I've been inspired by watching that man. And I know this is taboo. Oh my God, an orchestra director inspired by a football coach, right? But I am not an athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I joke and say I don't do sports ball. I played football in middle school for 1 year and the coach used to yell at me because I called it football rehearsal. I have football rehearsal. It's practice, Hanson. Sorry, coach. So I'm not an athletics person, but how I've seen my athletic director build this culture of what it is to be a team player and to build. It's beautiful. I mean, it truly is beautiful what he has accomplished. And I have learned from that and had those conversations with him. And he's talked about kids, star athletes, that he's seen leave because they lost a game to a rival and the parents lost it. And he's like, look, I'm not here to win games. I'm here to teach young men. That's why I'm here. Mm-hmm. And I hear him say that with conviction and he believes it. And I thought, holy crap, am I teaching orchestra to get sweepstakes? Am I teaching orchestra to appease a fine arts administrator? Am I teaching orchestra to get more ones, to get more kids in region, to get whatever? Is that my goal? Or have I created this loftier goal of creating better human beings with their experience in orchestra? And that's going to include failure, and that's going to include success and navigating that carefully. Some people are attracted to that, and some people aren't. Mm-hmm. You see on my wall in my office, I have the quote by Maxine Greene, and all of my parents know this quote. I say it at almost every concert. The arts, it has been said, cannot change the world, but they can change human beings who can change the world. And when people ask me, why do you teach music in public school? I say, to change the world. And they'll kind of joke, and I'll tell them that quote, and I'll say, what I'm doing is creating a paradigm shift in the way that my students think and engage with the world. They are looking at it creatively. They are looking at it divergently. They see things and hear things and experience things differently because they're engaged with the arts. Past the introductory level, they are engaged with the arts. That is going to change the world because the way that they think and act in the world is different because of their arts involvement. Some people are really attracted to that, and those people become diehard fans, and they are booster members, and they are engaged, and their kids love it. And the people that are looking for the trophy and looking for the win, to be brutally honest, a lot of those kids just find what they wanted somewhere else, and they're happier for it. They get plugged into a sport or to another extracurricular thing, or a big thing we have here is mountain biking. I've had kids that just do mountain biking and like get their trophy and their medal, and they experience success, and it teaches them something, and they learn about discipline and hard work. Great. Like, I'm never mad at that kid.
Yeah.
I'm never mad because they found what it is that they wanted. Just like we said earlier, the orchestra kid is the orchestra kid. They're not the band kid. So give them what it is that they want so that they get what they need. So I would never force a parent or try to, like you said, like dupe or trick a parent into something. I never have to lie to them about what my program represents.
Well, I wasn't clear enough in that question I had asked.
Okay.
I mean, this is all, yes, this is all definitely a scenario that we have seen before.
Yeah.
Where both the kid and the parent are like, if I'm not winning, then I'm not interested. But I was also, and I just didn't say it out loud, but I was also thinking of the kids I have who love it. Absolutely.
Yes.
But the parent thinks it is of no use to you. You don't really need to take orchestra all 4 years in high school.
Oh my gosh. Parent-student conference. If that doesn't fix the problem, there are bigger issues at play. And I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, but every time that I've had that situation, when I sit the parent down with the student and I engage the student in a conversation about orchestra, and that parent has to sit and see how their kid lights up and see their kid talk about orchestra, that is always the changing moment. It's always the defining moment. And I've had a few parents, in fact, I have a kid right now, junior, is in FFA, raises steer, and I've learned more about steer than I ever cared to know. He's an officer in the orchestra, just a brilliant kid, and loves orchestra. And his parents, his dad in particular, has tried to get him to quit every year because he wants him to spend more time at their ranch getting the cattle ready because, and this is really practical, in fact, I've had to talk this kid out of coming to orchestra events to go to livestock shows because he's getting scholarship money for college. I mean, they get thousands of dollars for these steer that they raise. And so he'll tell me, like, well, I don't want to come to the thing. And I was like, no, it's a social event. Go freaking get some money. Sell the cow. You know, I'm like, what are you doing here? His mother in particular had come and sat down with me and was like, look, we're really concerned because he must take orchestra every year, but we need him to do more with FFA. And he was president of FFA this year, and he didn't want to do it. And he was protesting and had actually created a very negative dynamic at his household for it. And he was like, and you know, how do you have that conversation? Why are your parents mad at you? Why did you get grounded? Well, because I went to an orchestra event because I want to practice my violin. Like, what? You know, like, what is that?
Yeah.
It's such a crazy conversation to have. But in context for his family, they've invested so much money into his livestock. It made perfect sense. I wasn't mad at his parents. What they were saying was logical. But when I sat down with his mother, when we sat down and we talked about orchestra, and I asked him point blank, I said, why? And it was a very casual conversation. You know, I wasn't trying to, again, trick or dupe the parent or anything. I just said, if I want you to do something for me, you know, tell me, why do you love orchestra? And he, just light up. And this and that. And I was like, what happened in class? I tell you what happened in class yesterday. Oh, someone was struggling. We broke off into sectionals, and I helped them learn this passage, and we had to shift in third position. He's using the jargon, and he's plugged in, and his mom is watching this. And I just, you know, that's the evidence that she needed. It was, this is changing my son's life. He's a different person because of it, and he's engaged, and he's learning, and he's doing all these things that he doesn't get anywhere else but orchestra. And I'm absolutely proud to say that he's, again, an officer in orchestra, the concertmaster of my non-varsity group. Like, he's totally plugged in. And his parents, we communicate a lot to avoid conflicts. And his father's still a little bit resentful, but comes to every concert, celebrates with us when we do our social events, and it was communication, and it was them seeing their son seeing him in orchestra in a broad sense, if that makes seeing him plugged in, that changed everything.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Christopher Hanson. The educational work featured at the end of this episode is Romance by Tracy Rush. You can find it at luxmusic.com. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, shoot us an email at rightofstring@gmail.com.
Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts and join us for our next episode.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.